How can you use virtual events in order to build community? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this video. In fact, I'm specifically going to walk you through a type of virtual event that's called a social workshop. I love social workshops because they are fantastic for building community. Let's start by talking about what we mean by the word community, because it's very specific. And in fact, a community is not the same thing as an audience. A community is a group of people who come together for a shared mission. They're all trying to accomplish the same thing in some way. So for example, there might be a community of podcasters who are all trying to learn from each other so that they can become better podcasters. There might be a community of stand-up comedians who are all trying to come together so that they can get better at being stand-up comedians. It's really important when you set out to build a community that you understand what the mission of the community members is. Now, that mission must be shared by all of the community members. It can't be something that just the community organizers are trying to accomplish. That's the business purpose of the community, but it's not the mission. The mission is shared by all of the members. Now, if you're like me, you're a content creator and you know how to use content to attract an audience. That's the basic idea behind content marketing. You create content, you use that content to attract an audience, and then you monetize that audience. That's not what we're talking about when we're talking about community building. There's a key difference between audiences and communities. You see, audience members don't talk to each other. They aren't connected just because they consume the same content. You may love Game of Thrones and I may love Game of Thrones. That doesn't mean that we're connected. It's different with a community. With a community, we have a group of people who have a shared mission and they come together in a space. It's not just that we're creating content. That's the key thing that you need to do as a community organizer, is that you need to create a space where your members can come together. And in that space, it's not just that your members can talk to you and you can talk to them. Even more important than that is that they talk to each other. That's what makes a community a community. So we need to use our virtual events to build a space. So how do we do that? How do we build a space for our community members to come together? Well, there's basically just 4 types of spaces. Let's run through them really quickly. The first is one that you all know. It is a permanent physical structure that is created for a purpose. So this is something like a church or a school or an office. These are all spaces that were created for a community to come together for a shared purpose. Now, you're probably not looking to build a physical space that's permanent. So the other type of physical space is temporary. This is one where we create an in-person event for people to come together and connect with each other for a common purpose. This is something like a conference or an expo or a festival, anything like that. On top of that, there are 2 types of digital spaces that we can build. The first is an online group. This is something like a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group. It could be a Slack channel. It could be a Discord server, or it could be something proprietary built on a platform like Circle or Mighty Networks or something like that. But the basic idea is that it is a place where people can come together and they can talk, and they do so asynchronously. What that means is that I post something and you don't reply in real time. Maybe you come by half an hour later and you leave a comment, and then somebody else comes by the next day and leaves another comment, and the conversation continues on like that. That is an online group. And then that brings us to our 4th and final type of space that you can build, which are virtual events. Virtual events are online, just like online groups. The difference is they are in real time. That I talk to you and you talk to me and we're having an actual conversation, because we're both, even though we're not in the same physical space, we are both in the same digital space at the same time. And so we can carry on a conversation. So those are the 4 types of spaces you can build in order to build your community. In this video, we are talking specifically about virtual events, that 4th type of space. And one of the things that we've got to do when we host a virtual event is make sure that we carve out time for our members who are attending to actually talk to each other. And one thing I want to point out here is that there can be events which don't actually create spaces. Remember, if the people just show up to consume the content and they don't actually talk to each other, that's not a community. That's just an audience. This can happen with in-person events. For example, if you go to a concert and all you do is consume the content that is coming from the band that's on stage, that's just content. It's not actually a community building event. The same thing is true when we are talking about digital events. If you go to a webinar and the communication is just one way. It's just the speaker making their presentation, and you don't have any other interaction with the other attendees at the webinar, that's just content. And let me be clear, when I'm talking about interaction with other people, I'm talking about real connection where you can form real relationships. I'm not just talking about you leave a comment on a live stream or there's a poll or there's comments in a chat box. I mean, you are actually forming a relationship with other people. In order for a virtual event to create community, it's got to have an opportunity for the people there to form relationships with each other. That's key. And so that brings me to the concept of social workshops. And it explains why social workshops are so good at building community. Because unlike a webinar, a social workshop is not just content. A social workshop is divided into two parts. First, there's a presentation, and then there's a conversation. Now, the presentation is meant to educate the audience, and that presentation can take a number of different forms. It could be, for example, a PowerPoint presentation, or it could be a one-on-one interview, or it could even be a panel discussion. And usually there's a chat box going on the side, and maybe you have a couple of interactive polls, but the audience, for the most part, is quietly consuming the content that is being fed to them in a one-way manner. That's the presentation. Now let's talk about the conversation, because this is the second element and this is key. Conversation is time that is specifically set aside so that the attendees can interact with each other, and they are encouraged to do so with their camera on and with their mic on. And when you're in the conversation portion of your social workshop, the key is to get your attendees to talk to each other, to communicate with each other, to meet each other, and to form new relationships, because ultimately that's what turns your virtual events into a community. Before I go too much further, I want to let you know that in the description to this video, you can find a link to a free checklist for your next social workshop. I think you'll find that that will help you make sure that you get your social workshop done right. Of course, you can't just host one social workshop and think, hey, now I've got a community. Now, this is an ongoing process. This is something where you have to host the virtual events at a regular cadence, such as monthly or bi-weekly or whatever works best for your organization. But the idea here is that you want people to keep coming back so that those relationships stick, and so that they really start to hold, because that's what makes it a community. Another crucial component to social workshops is the follow-up email campaign that happens in between these events. So let's say you're hosting a social workshop once a month. You want to make sure that in between, you've got an email campaign that continues to engage with the people who attended your last workshop and gets them to come to the next one. Now, before we go any further, I want to let you know that I have written a guide for producing social workshops. It'll walk you through every step of the process. You can find that by using the link in the description to this video. Check it out. Finally, let's talk about why social workshops are so powerful and why I think they're such a great tool, particularly when you are just at the beginning of launching your community. You see, there are other ways that you could create spaces for your community. You could do a big in-person event, but that's really expensive and takes a lot of time. You could build an online group, and if you've got a large email list, maybe that's where you go. But if you aren't there yet, it's really hard to get an online group going with just a small number of people. So virtual events are usually the easiest place to start. A social workshop can be really powerful even if you've only got 10 attendees there. And we found that people who come to one social workshop tend to really like them, so they come to more and they start coming over and over and over again. And so it's a great way to grow a new community from scratch. That's why I love social workshops. Social workshops have a lot of other benefits as well. For example, because people have to register in order to attend, it helps you grow your email list. Because there's a presentation that happens at your workshop, you walk out of that event with a recording that you can now use as content. And this content can go on your website, you can post it to social media, or you can use it in follow-up email campaigns. And the final reason I like social workshops is because they take less work and less money than all of the other ways that we could potentially build spaces. So if you want to go out and you want to build a school, you can do that, go ahead, but there are easier ways to launch a community. I highly recommend that when you set out to launch your community, you start with virtual events and specifically with social workshops. I'm Seth Resler. I'm the founder of Community Marketing Revolution, and I've got two resources that might be helpful for you. The first is a checklist to help you with your social workshops, and the second is a guide that will walk you through every step of the process. You can find links to both of those in the description for this video below. Thanks for watching.